All right, so thank you everyone again for your patience. We are so excited to have you all here for our breakout session number 1 titled Don't Look Away, Embracing Anti-Bias Classrooms. I'm Janelle Williamson. I'm an administrative coordinator here at the Crane Center, and I'm, again, so excited to have you all here. So you'll be seeing me in the chat box. I'll be keeping track of the chat and the questions and informing you all of housekeeping items. We are really looking forward to having an honest and engaging discussion today. And so this morning, or this afternoon by now, I am pleased to welcome Dr. Iheoma Iruka and Dr. Stephanie Curenton, authors of the book, Don't Look Away. As we learned this morning, Dr. Iruka is one day into her new role at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill as a research professor in the Department of Public Policy and as the director of the Early Childhood Health and Racial Equity Program at the Franklin Porter Graham Child Development Institute. We also have Dr. Stephanie Curenton joining us here today from Boston University Wheelock College of Education and Human Development, where she is an associate professor, the executive director at the Center on the Ecology of Early Development, and program director for Child and Youth Policy Certificate. And so welcome to this breakout session. I'm going to turn it over to both of you. I'm going to turn my screen dark and muted. You'll see me in the chat box, and I'll come on later to do Q&A. And so now I will turn it over to our speakers.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. We're so happy to be here. I know that you've already had a full morning with Iheoma, and so I just wanted to give my hello to you, and I'll turn it over to Iheoma to say anything else that she might want to say after, even if she hasn't said it all already.
Yeah, no, I laid it out there. No, So of course, it's always nice when you have your sister friend here with you. So I'm Iheoma Iruka, and I'm so glad to be with you all, but even better to be with my sister friend Stephanie. So yes.
Yeah. Well, we're happy to be here today. Our goal here is to sort of walk you through this breakout session, just to dive a little bit deeper in terms of everything that Iheoma was saying today. And she and I have done this together so many times. It's like we're playing basketball together. So we just kind of flow back and forth, and we're going to do that, have that same style as we're here now. So I'm going to go ahead and start advancing the slides. Hold on. There we go. So, so our goals here today are, we have 4 goals. One, we would like to describe the goals of the book. We want to spend some time sort of showcasing its features, and then we're going to engage in what we hope is sort of a little bit version of some open mic discussions. And with that, we have some questions that are sort of situated throughout our presentation, and we're hoping that as we pose the question, people will respond in the chat, and we can sort of hear from you and you get your ideas. And then we'll talk about some anti-bias tools and strategies that you can use going forward. And I wanted to say hello to and thank you to all the people who are telling us good morning here in the chat. And I see we have people from Columbus and Circleville, and I think I saw someone from Chicago here. And so it's just so great to see you all this morning. So, oops, I skipped it. So Iheoma, I'll let you do this one about our goals for the book.
So, I mean, if you saw the book cover, we're trying to honor just the brownness, blackness, all that. We're trying to honor, but most importantly, the history and legacy of early kin education, right? And it's not it's all perfect, but we're trying to obviously sort of push the field forward while also recognizing part of the challenges. So that's one part of it. It's given, like this morning, history, it matters, right? And so we're trying to lay that history, but also say, what could we do moving forward to make it even better and stronger? We want to support our early childhood essential workforce. Like now they're actually viewed as essential, so we're really trying to make sure that we honor that. And this book, I would say, is really for anybody, from program leaders, educators, directors, even not early child people, like people who are not even early child have been reading this book. I've been so amazed by. And then of course, we want to ensure that our Black children, other children of color experience the highest quality care. I mean, this is care that to me, they should be able to experience that they are important, that they are valuable, that they are worthy. This is, things that, the class or those measures don't capture. We want the children to experience that level of high quality and just affirmation in classrooms. And obviously create a less biased society by it all, right? Like I always say to people, the man who murdered George Floyd was a child once. And so what could his early child teacher have done, to sort of set the foundation about how to make sure that we acknowledge that we have biases, but how do we also see everybody as human and have an opportunity to live. So I always think, how do we create that? And could early child really be part of that? And of course, how do we address the opportunity gap in many ways? Because it's not about the achievement gap, which blames children, right? It's about all these inequities that we have literally put in the system. And so hopefully this book, we're trying to take people on a journey of history, but also what can you do today? So really a self-actualization kind of book, which I don't know if that was our full intention, but I think that's really what it is. It's a journey of self, but also about what you can do and practical things you can do in the classroom as soon as you open the door and walk in.
Okay. So I'll take this one where it's just to think about sort of how our book is sort of structured. As Iheoma said, the book has turned into something somewhat of a self-help book. And we really imagine it to be sort of a tool for teachers, but it's a tool that other people are using as well. And because we wanted it to be used as an active tool, we incorporated sort of certain things that force people to reflect, such as we use vignettes throughout the book that are inspired by real world events. And we define and integrate key terms that are often used but rarely defined. So we define things like implicit bias. We define terms like social justice, racial justice, etc. We also put in intentionally what we call these multimodal reflection activities. So if you all have read the book, you know that there's this whole activity that we call lemon heads and rompers, in which people can sort of look at the complexity of their social network group. We have the I am from activity, and then we also have incorporated the privilege walk. And then there's lots and lots of reflection questions sort of all throughout. And Iheoma.
And then I would just say, I think, and I just want to just go, not, you have to go back to that screen, but I think to those, I want to say that the reason why it's multimodal is because we know, especially for Black people, we learn in many different ways, in different forms, from movement to music, to words, to reading. So we're trying to incorporate a lot of who we are from the African diaspora. And that's something we didn't say actually even I didn't say in the earlier stages. If you look at the authors, we're all Black scholars in the field, but we're also actually from the diaspora. We have people who have family originated from parts of Africa. We have from the Caribbean. We have those who are originators from the slave populations, but we're all from the Black diaspora. And so it's important that we capture a little bit of this Afrocentrism in our book and the way it comes out. And the next slide, sorry. And then part of the book is really to think about, part of anti-racism, anti-bias is that we have to understand and work with families, right? To understand children, we have to know who is your kin, who is your family. And that's really what we're trying to do by laying out sort of the 4 E's that Stephanie and I have crafted through another book, ideas of exploration. Like we have to understand, families' beliefs and their goals, what their contexts have been. We have to sort of think about the expectations for families. What kind of expectations do we have, and what is it based on? And informing families, not educating them in sort of this formal way, but how do we provide them with evidence about their early years? Why does it matter? And of course, I say we use the word empowerment, but not really. We're changing the equipment because empowerment has this pejorative sense. But how do we equip families to navigate a racist system? Right. This is one of those things where we don't tell families it's not about your child being smart. Right. We have many smart kids. But it's how do you navigate a system that inherently will always create inequities, particularly if you're Black, and how do we sort of give them some of those tools to be the advocate for their family, for those who look like their child themselves, etc.
Great. So now we're going to flash it out for our first sort of question. And so we're posing to you all sort of this general question that we have here that we call our open mic questions. And we hope that you can respond in the chat, and we'll pick a few responses and discuss. But the question is, why do we as a field need to be striving for fully embracing anti-bias classrooms? Like, why is this important to us? Why do we need to do this in general?
I'm gonna look at the chat box, and don't write your thesis here, people. Try to do like a couple of words.
Yeah.
All right.
I guess I'll get it going a little bit while we're waiting for some things to come in. So one of the things that we know, as Ioma and I have been doing this for a long, long time, we always felt as though there was a need to be striving towards this. But now, given everything that we're facing and everything that is sort of happening and putting so much pressure on families of color during this COVID time and during this time of of obvious police brutality, right? Um, we think it's even more important to be striving to embrace anti-bias classrooms. And I'm going to turn to
I'll read you some. Yeah, I'll read you some. So some of them, I mean, these are some good ones. They're like, it's long overdue because we're trying to change the achievement gap to really disrupt development of implicit bias. Because if we can change it in the classrooms, we can build them for the world. And some people are saying because it's the right thing to do and it will be best for practice. To be treated as human beings who have voice, rights, and are respected. That classrooms need to be safe spaces to learn and develop. To grow children's self-esteem and to help bring anti-racism to the forefront in place of antiquated racist practices, because it's like a wildfire. Respect for everyone, and our little kids will become grown-ups who love and care forever, Roddy.
yeah.
So there's a lot, yes.
Yeah, I think that this is really, a critical time. It's a critical time that's born out of a lot of sadness, but it's a critical time nonetheless in which we are all on the same page. Well, I guess not exactly everybody, let me say that, but most of us are on the same page in the sense that there's a problem here and that we need to be moving forward and working together about how to address this problem because our goal is to ultimately have a better society and also have a more loving, caring, accepting society for children as they're growing and developing.
Oh, that's what Miss Kid. I just want to read Miss Kid's pre-K. That's the name, her tag name. She says, "Our classrooms are the microcosm of the world of our future. If we bring these changes in our classrooms, these children will grow up and hold the world in their hands." And I think exactly what you're just saying, Stephanie, is like this is what we have to do to create a better future that's loving and caring and creating a community.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
great. So I'm going to go to the next open mic question. And I'll let you do this one and I'll watch the chat for you, Iheoma.
Okay, hold on. I gotta stop my chat because I gotta stop reading the chat. Okay, so what tools and approaches can educators use to assess their own cultural awareness and bias? Right? Are there any things you use? Are there particularly either it's on paper, either you work with friends or colleagues, or are there any what tools and approaches are you using?
So we have Miss Brittany who says books and graphs and quotes. We have music as a suggestion.
Yeah. And I love it. And I love when people talk about music, right? Because if you think about it, Black people and music just goes hand in hand. Like people try to steal it all the time, though, because it's literally like your soul. It's who you are, and that's why I think even in the midst of such travesty, oppression that we have been going through as a people for so long, our music it just gets you to move. It gets your soul going. I mean, I watched Verses and Verses the other day, and it was with Miss Patty. Oh my God. And it was just like, you just like, oh my gosh, like to have the privilege of music, just the way it moves us to just keep healing. I think it's so important.
Yeah.
What else you see?
Some of the other things that people are listing here are implicit bias tests. I see a lot of people talking about literacy, makes me so excited. Thinking about literacy. There was someone further up that talks about ratio linguistics as well, using as a tool. And then someone is shouting out the Curwen Institute, which is one of my favorite
Yes.
places at Ohio State. And I guess I need to tell you all that I am a Columbus, Ohio girl. I graduated from Northland High School in 1993. So yes.
Giving your age away.
And I guess the Curwen Institute is one of my favorite aspects of OSU. And say, okay, great. So, and another important one that I just want to make sure that I throw back at you, Iheoma, is family engagement. So there were a couple of people that talked about how using family engagement is the one to sort of really help with in cultural awareness.
Absolutely. I mean, family, I feel like, you know what, I mean, why are we taking this, because we're doing this like sister girl, sort of like Oprah couch kind of thing. So family engagement, like I want us to do better with family engagement. Like, I mean, I feel like we're sort of still doing like, I'm going to help you, give you stuff, but I want us to be thinking about family engagement as sort of a tool to create assets. Like, imagine if your family engagement focused on, look, I know right now you're probably a head start because, you know, your income qualifies, but what could we be doing in terms of helping families develop assets? How about, you know, things about real estate? If we understood how tax codes worked, oh my goodness, all of us will pool some of our money together, grab a couple of homes, and imagine the equity, right? Because wealth is only created over generations. So I just wish that from some of our family engagement approaches would really focus on the sort of wealth side and not just on the sort of income and needs and stuff. I think those are important, but I think we need to begin to give freedom. Like that, if the idea of freedom is something I hope that we can continue to move forward on with the family engagement pieces. I think that is the only way. When you feel like a human is when you can challenge the system, right? Only when we feel like, you know what, I got nothing else to lose, can I start pushing harder on systems to be equitable.
Yeah. And we do have the other book too that is called the Craft book that really looks at sort of anti-bias practices with families, which is the slide that Iheoma was talking about before. And that is like a really deep dive that has reflection activities and vignettes as well to help people think about families and the diversity of families and how to work with them.
Stephanie, you're going to talk about access here?
I don't have that in the question, but we can. Do you want me to right here?
Yeah, I feel like that would be a tool, something to give them a little, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so we can talk about another thing that we have been doing and working on over the last couple of years is that there's a classroom measurement, classroom observation tool that we've been working on that's called the Assessing Classroom Social Cultural Equity Scale. And what makes this classroom tool, a quality tool, different than the ERS and the class is that it's specifically looking at classroom quality from the lens of racially marginalized children. And it's sort of getting the observer to think about how are these children being treated, how are they being, what are their relationships like with the teachers, what are their relationships like with peers, and then it also looks at sort of these things that we would consider to be sort of general good quality as well. And then we have another thing that's sort of very unique that we don't see in a lot of our quality measures is really looking at sort of how a classroom might do what we call challenging status quo knowledge, meaning how a classroom is creating counter narratives, right? And bringing in counter narratives into that classroom that show people of color as being efficacious and being sort of creative, being in systems of power, et cetera. And so that tool is, we love it. We've been doing it for a while. We love it. And we think that it is really something that will change the field and make the education of children of color lives better.
And I want to say what Stephanie didn't say, and somebody asked the link. We can share more about it. But I want, you know, Stephanie first of all is the brainchild of that whole tool. And I think it's something to first of all make sure I underline and underscore. The second part about it is that while right is being created for researchers, you know, in particular to use, it really in the end of it, it's actually giving you like a new set of glasses, even for whether it's a rater, but even an educator, administrator, a leader, a coach, is giving you a lens to sort of say, okay, let me look at it from a Black child. Like, don't forget, we have been drinking the water of anti-Black racism, right? So imagine that now you can actually use the lens. Actually, don't be colorblind. We want you to look at your minoritized children and being able to see, oh my goodness, like we've been in some high quality classrooms. Stephanie and I have seen this, where literally the Black children, literally a teacher walked over the boy's work. It didn't even have but 2-second conversation with the Black boy, but then had a whole sit down, a whole kumbaya with the white boy. We've literally seen this happen in what people will consider the highest quality classrooms. And so this tool hopefully would give educators and so many people a different lens to say, we're not sensitive. Just look at the evidence. Just look at the actual evidence based on this tool that's objective in its own way. So I mean, I want to make sure that I stress that it's not what tutoring, you know, our own or even tutoring Stephanie's, but it's to say that we need to provide more concrete tools for not just teachers, but really for administrators, for systems to use to really tell them, yes, your system is biased, and yes, your system is inherently racist, and we can't fix what we don't see, right? So trying to make it visible, and this is one of those tools that I think could really help make racism in all of its forms, at least in the classroom, much more visible.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would add to it too is, like I said, we've been doing this for a long time, right? This is like our life's body of work. And so as we're talking about a tool now, but the way the tool is used as the evidence, all of the other books that we're writing those are the books that actually change the practice, right? So reading the Don't Look Away is hopefully going to help you so that you don't end up with negative scores on the access tool. Reading the craft book is something that is also going to help you so that you don't end up with negative scores on that tool. So it's a whole body, it's a holistic sort of view in term when we think about anti-bias work. It's the same thing that we when we're thinking about teachers and literacy development, right? We don't expose teachers to one literacy class, right? We expose them to multiple literacy classes. We teach them that actively that literacy is embedded in all of the activities that we do throughout the day with children. We see anti-bias instruction as the same thing, is the same way. It is something that infuses the classroom and that is a part of what we do every day in the classroom. All right, so then we'll go to the next one. And I think this one is yours. Is it yours? You're muted.
Here, I'm trying to unmute myself. So why should a child's racial identity matter for educators? Like, why should we care? Why can't we just say, you know what, everybody is beautiful, everybody is equal? Why should their racial identity matter for educators, for you, in your classroom, in your program?
And I want to check.
Well, I would start by saying that to me, if you ignore children's racial identity, then you're ignoring who they are. Like, that's why the idea of this colorblindness is so dangerous, because it inherently says, I do not see you. But if you don't see my brownness, then you don't see my experiences, you don't see my assets, you don't see anything little that is about me, especially in a racist society that built it because of my skin color. So that in of itself is actually inherently really, really a problematic thing if we don't actually acknowledge children's racial identity in education, any form of teaching, learning, and caring. What are people saying out here?
Because it's a part of because it's a part of children's identity, because we need to be respecting all children's identities, because we want to see a whole child when we think about the interactions. They're going too fast now. And someone is saying because equal doesn't mean fair. And another person said it shows respect for each child, right? I can tell a little story on this slide too that just actually happened just yesterday with my son, who's 7. He decided that he was going to use the video feature on the iPad and record a video of himself that was sort of all about me. So he's, I guess he's a burgeoning YouTube star. So he's talking about creating a whole video where he's talking about all about me. And I could hear him as he's listing all of these different things. And so he's saying, I like video games, I like Dogman books, and he's listing all these things. And then one of the things that he says, and I'm a Jamaican. And then he defines what a Jamaican is. And he says, I'm a Jamaican because my father is Jamaican and I'm American. And I was just so floored in the sense that, we've used the term before, but I was so, I guess I shouldn't say floored, so excited, so pleased that he saw this as part of his identity as he's listing all the things that are so valuable to him, as much as the video games and the Dogman books. Like, this was key to who he was as well.
Oh my God, I love that. Yes, our version of YouTube star. Get that money, Stephen.
Okay, we'll go to the next one here. So this is our other question that we have for you. And it says, what tools and approaches can educators use to assess and support children's positive racial identity and address white privilege and anti-racism and anti-Blackness? Right.
I'll look at the chat. Okay, I'll look at the chat for you.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things is that we were intentional about providing sort of some tools and strategies, suggesting tools and strategies within the book. There are also other really great books that provide tools and strategies. There is the Louise Derman Sparks book that has some strategies. They actually have several books now. They have some good strategies. I think another one that is still a great classic and really important is Vivian Palin's book, You Can't Say You Can't Play. So that book was published like in the 70s, but it was so ahead of its time because what Vivian Palin was illustrating in that book is how children perpetuate sort of racism and bias and gender and sexism within the classroom, even at these early ages. And so that whole book is around how do you create a classroom environment in which these isms are not sort of seeping through. And so I think that there's lots of tools that are sort of out there. There's also another thing that is within the book that is in one of the last chapters. Our colleague Carrie Ann was really the mastermind behind that, and it's talking about a racial observation tool, racial identity observation tool. And so in that, there's sort of things that she's listing that you can watch for specifically in your class to see sort of how racial interactions are unfolding within the classroom context. And it gives you, again, that concrete information to help you think about, well, where can I intervene? Like, how can I read different types of books that are going to stop sort of some of the exclusionary practices that might be going on? Or how can I expose children to other images, other non-gender stereotype images of what am I saying, of jobs and sort of roles at home and in the community. So what are some of the things in the chat?
Yeah, so well, first somebody had put out a whole chat around the Trolls movie and sort of this idea of seeing differences and it being okay to see differences. There's a lot of chats around the power of literacy in books, empowering families, like creating diverse storybooks and media centers to really decenter whiteness and affirm minority racial identities. There's a lot of people mentioned the Vivian Paley book, and people mentioned also just taking advantage of teachable moments and to not stay silent as well.
Yeah. The other thing too that I'll just add right here is that something that we really love is that my team and I at SEED, the Center on the Ecology of Early Development, we were working with our colleagues at the University of Pittsburgh, and we published a list of what we call racially affirming storybooks for children from toddlerhood all the way up to the end of elementary school, so the end of say 5th grade. It has chapter books, it has picture books, etc. And what we did is we actually went through almost every book that is in there. We have read ourselves to our children or either in our classrooms. And the way in which we see these books being so meaningful is that these books can be used as tools to spur these deep discussions with children around issues of race. And it allows children to do it sort of in a safe way because the events in the book are so abstract enough that the children don't feel as personally stressed, but at the same time, because of what we know how children empathize with characters in a book, it's still real enough emotionally that they can become involved and really want to think through critically about how to solve a problem. And yes, I will post the link to the book. I will do it.
I was going to good. And then I think one of the things that people also made note of is the idea of just listening, right? So that like using your both your ears and obviously both your eyes to both observe and also to just listen. There's a lot that you can observe by hearing children and how they talk is really important.
Okay. I'm going to go to the next slide and I'll let you do this one while I look for that link for the book.
Sure. And so some of the things that we talk about in the book is to really discuss discuss and address racial bias and prejudice and discrimination with children in the early years. I think this is kind of what we've kind of found is a lot of adults, early child educators writ large, actually feel that you don't talk about issues of bias and racism until children are probably 6 or 7. But we know now that children really, their biases start pretty early, like as early as 9 months, right? Children start following those who look like their primary caregiver as early as 9 months. And then they start having friends of the same race quite early, like at 3 years old. And so we have to recognize that these biases start early. And then these biases are also used to exclude peers from play and social groups. So part of the tools in which you'll read in the book is sort of like, what can you do and observe, right? What are the kind of play groups that are forming? What are the kind of seclusion that's happening? Are there, particular ways that people expect children to be or behave? Or you can't come to my party, or you can't come to this part of it because you're not this, you're not that. So I think it's really looking a lot of sort of the languaging that's happening. And it's also, we also talk about sort of that we have to challenge misperceptions and stereotypes, right? Making sure that we don't see certain children a particular way, right? So we have to even think about our gender, right? The issue of gender is pretty powerful. Hello, boys and girls. What if there's some children who literally don't identify as a boy or a girl? And so we have to start thinking about either from both the racial lens, but also from other identities that we know actually begins to form pretty early. And especially with Black children, do we have a particular way that we want them to be, right? You must be quiet, sit still, crisscross applesauce. How do we begin to challenge the stereotypes that we have about certain groups of children?
Okay, great. I'm gonna say, please email me for the list because I can't find it. I can't figure out how to attach it in the chat right now. I think it's because we're in the presentation mode. But if you email me, I will send it to you. Okay, and I put my email here.
Okay, good. I was about to do.
Yeah. Okay. So the other tools that we talk about is sort of this idea of openly discussing and addressing racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination with children in the early years. Iheoma was just talking about that, understanding that these actually are problems that develop very early on. In fact, in one of our other books that we wrote, we have a graph that shows that the height of prejudice thinking is really in the preschool years, right? And it's because of sort of the mental aspects of categorization and things like that that are going on in children's minds at that time. They're trying to make sense of the world and they're taking in a lot of information very quickly. So they're observing things very, very much. And they notice when people are treated differently based on the way they look. And so they're learning to act accordingly. And so we have to understand that children are exposed to all of these negative images and negative stereotypes. And if we want to counter those, we have to be intentional and explicit in our actions to counter these things. The other point that I would say here is we need to work to recruit and retain Black educators and other educators of color across all age groups and across all settings within our field. And one of the reasons why we need that is because of just pure role models, just having children see and develop relationships with other caregivers who are diverse, right? The other thing is because teachers of color have a stronger, they have more racial literacy that actually helps them to positively socialize and help children who've experienced racial trauma. And racial literacy is defined by Howard Stevenson, and it talks about sort of the knowledge that comes with the knowledge and being able to sort of use and problem solve around racial issues, right? How we learn to talk about these things, how we learn to generate solutions, how we learn to sort of encode them in our memories are some of the things that are the components of sort of racial literacy. And then let's go here. Okay, and so we will do, I'll let Iheoma do this one.
So the Trust for Learning sort of has these sort of principles. And I would say Trust for Learning really is a group, they sort of fund a group of people called Ideal Learning. And this includes your Montessori, your Reggios, your Bank Street, all that. And part of what this group has done is say, we believe in equity as our first principle, right? The equity about that all children deserve the best start in life. They deserve the best learning experiences, no matter their race, their ethnicity, or even their income level. And so equity guides the decision-making for all of these quote unquote ideal learning principles. And part of what they all agree to is that you can only construct knowledge through experience, right? That part of what we have to begin to foster in our programs is that experience matters, hands-on matters, and not just what we, just not these sort of abstract bias kind of thinking. And that play is critically important, right? The idea of play needs to be a form of how children learn. And that's how children learn anyways. And that it needs to be like all of that needs to go through the idea of play. And that relationships matter, right? Relationship with children, with each other, with their environment, with adults, and their families, that all that really matters. And that learning has to be personal, right? A lot of our curriculum sort of strip this issue of race and identity out of it. And that we have to begin to say that to be developmentally appropriate, you actually have to make it personal to you, to your community, to your family. And the teacher should be thought of as a guide, right? Not sort of, I know it all, I am the oracle kind of thing. but that they are facilitating children's journey on this sort of this life course, right? That they're, I'm part of your journey and I'm going to facilitate your learning to, in many ways. And I think that's a different way of being, right? If you're the teacher versus a guide, that means I'm guiding you in your own journey of learning. And also the environment is intentional and designed to meet the needs of kids, right? For example, we know in some of these ideal learning programs, right, the tables are made a particular way, the materials are made a particular way to really be of interest to young children and young children's curiosity in their mind. And it's always not just about children's learning, adult learning, right? As I said earlier, we should all be on a journey. Like, I need to learn about anti-racism and how to be part of it, right? And that every part of anybody's educational world, teachers should be learning, children should be learning, every adult should be on that learning path. And of course, valuing the time of childhood. That, the fact that we are criminalizing children at such a young age, the fact that we're telling them that you're not worthy at such a young age is something that we should believe is unconscionable. And so to me, anything that excludes children, minimizes who they are, who their family is, who their community is something that we should really, think about in a much more thoughtful way. And this is about equity. And equity is about all of these things, right? You can't have high quality if you don't have equity. And if you don't have these things, then to me, we have to question, do we have high quality programming?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the other thing that I would just say about the Trust for Learning, one of the things that I love about sort of these goals that they list is that equity is at the top. So they, like Iheoma said, they think about Reggio, they think about Montessori, they think about all these different sort of pedagogies. But regardless of that, they're saying that equity is the number one thing that we have to be thinking about when we're going forward and thinking about how to build a sustainable system, as well as how to promote quality and access all throughout the system. And I just want to say that there is the link to the book list is now up in the chat. Thanks. And then, so I think, so that is officially our last slide. And I think we have time for some other questions that are now going to be moderated by Janelle. And I will stop sharing, okay?
Sounds great. Just a heads up, I will save the chat and send it to participants later. I don't know that the audience members have the ability to do that. So let's go ahead and get into our questions. There's quite a few. I'm going to start with a question from Rebecca Dorr. It says, can you all talk about any suggestions for educating parents about anti-racist classroom practices? Many parents don't think their young children recognize race or have biases, and so are uncomfortable with discussions of race with their young white children.
Yeah. So I'll just go off of this first one. I mean, we basically have said that that's not true. And so hopefully you can continue to have conversations with your friends and your loved ones, just telling them that it's just not true. What we know as developmental scientists, it's not true that children don't notice and understand these things. And the other thing that I would say for families that are white, that are in the process of trying to have these conversations with their children, books, again, are another good way to do this. Storybooks are a wonderful way to generate higher level conversations about complex things. And so I would say to fill your library with some of the books that we've suggested on our list, and fill your library with books that are suggested from book list curators that are specifically, they have been curating a list of books that are specifically for white parents who want to teach their children to be non-biased. And there are tons of lists out there that are specifically around that. And I would say go out, find those lists, and start buying books. Start buying books and reading them to your children is one of the ways.
And I'll just add, I mean, I feel like the books always, like, it's like if you have nobody black or brown in your bookshelf, you should change it. But I think, and especially with families, right, whether it's black families, brown families, white families, is that we have told them talking about race is a bad thing. And so I think part of it is that if you're going to do a parent night, you probably one of your things could probably be talking about what is racism, right? What are you trying to do? So I think schools, if you're a space of where families learn about things or where children learn about things, even if parents are uncomfortable, I think you need to offer these professional development. In my child's school, we offer that. Like, that is part of the parent meetings, right? Like, here's a session for 2 hours, come and sit here and learn. The teachers are doing it. So to me, schools should be an extension of the community, of family, of home as much as possible. We do have sort of this issue of where schools are different from homes, and that's where a lot of Black children and the issues come about. And so to me, schools can be part of where we can say, you know, I know you don't talk about racism because you probably live it every day because you just don't know how the words for it. But we can actually begin to have these meetings that actually begin to unpack racism, how it may actually exist in the school, right? The school being vulnerable about, here's how it kind of exists, our population, the curriculum, all these things. But then what are we trying to do to address it within our school and within our school communities? I think just being able to engage in these discourse, I think is important. I think Stephanie talked about the books, but I would say it's asking families to do their own journey walk, right? Do their own journey work in many ways. Like, who are your doctors? Who's your pediatrician? Where do you go grocery shopping? Who are your kids' friends, right? So I mean, and who are your friends, right? So many ways, it's not even about the children in many instances. It's about, let's tell families, go look at who you're, like that Whoppers game that Stephanie talked about. The book could actually be for parents too. Like, parents have to begin to do their own introspection, because you can try to expose children to all these things, but if they like look at their parents and say, you don't have anybody brown or Black in your house, in your life, they're gonna be like, then it's not important. So I think, just like we're going on our journey, we should expect families to also be going on the journey. And in schools, if you find that parents don't like it, then it tells you everything you need to know. Maybe that school or that program is not for that parent. Sometimes it's just not, there's not a match.
Well said.
All right. Another question here from Barbara Becker. How can we be an upstander to interrupt when we see people acting out in an unproductive way?
Okay, I can start this way. So she said, "Want me to go ahead?" I don't have an answer other than just get on the hell out. No, but I mean, so to me, if you remember issues, people, I mean, like, let's think about this. When you talk about racism, when you mention the word race, even, and you haven't added the ism part, even, people get a level of, there's a physiological reaction, especially if you've never engaged in it. And so I would say that when people start getting sort of a little bit riled up and, like, you know, challenging all this and that, I think it's to sort of allow them to emote, to say what they want. But this is why I would say, people, if you bring your own receipts, because to me, part of what I say is, I have read the books, I have read the laws and policies, right? I can say, go over here and find the laws about housing that the federal government really created to cut Black communities literally by highways. Go to any community in Columbus, go to any major urban sector, you will find a highway through what was a Black community, right? And so I would say, in many ways, it's better to have facts, because in the end of it, racism is a system, and your emotions does not fix the system. What fixes the system is a policy, and actually creating, you know, anti-racist policies to actually eradicate them. And don't forget, we have like 900, like in North Carolina alone, we have 950 policies that are like Jim Crow's. That means that literally it is built in it. So to even take away any policies, we're gonna have to change a bunch of stuff. So in many ways, people who kind of go through this emotion is what it is. Let them emote, but always have your information, your receipts, your definition, and then what they can do to sort of, you know, give them a video, give them a daggone book, give them a pamphlet. But I think in many ways, it shouldn't be emotional. It should be like, these are just facts, and it's not my fault that the white men decided to create all these policies.
The other thing that I would say to this too is that, you know, I mean, I know for me, sometimes these conversations happen and it's so jarring that it's happening that your brain, like your cognitive side of your brain, is not actually working. So you can't think of the facts. You can't think of all of these different things, you know, at that moment, because it is so jarring. But one thing that you can say in that moment is that you can say to that person, hey, that has offended me. What you said offended me, and it hurt me in this way. And just stand up and talk about it from your emotional point of view and say, you have offended me by what you said. And the reason why I say that, to lean on that once you're in those situations that are highly emotional, is, like I said, sometimes all these facts, all these thoughts don't come to us. But as human beings, we always know our gut. We always know our heart, and it's easy for us to speak from the heart, no matter how jarring a situation is. So if you can't think of all the facts, just speak from your heart and speak loudly and say, that I think that is wrong and you have offended me. Right?
That is such a good one. I like that, right? Because I mean, that's true. Like, and I think that's right. If you haven't, like, that is such a great point. Some of us have been engaged in this for so long that we could just pop out all the facts, right? But we don't even care what you're saying. But I think you're right about sort of that emotional part. And here's an example. So I was at a meeting, and a set of white people were studying what happened to be a lot of Black and brown people, and it was focused on income. And I said, so is there anything to be said about them being Black and brown? They're like, this is a study on income, not race. And of course it was like, wait a minute, but your sample is literally Black and brown people. And and when I actually eventually, after I sort of left the meeting because I couldn't handle it, when I actually had a conversation with these set of researchers, again, colleagues that a lot of us know who are in the research world, for me it was to say that, you know what, I was really highly offended. I was highly upset. I was disappointed, right? And this was literally 2 months ago, right, when we literally were in the thick of racial reckoning. And so it was one of those where I sort of exactly leaned in on the emotional part, that to think that brilliant people like they would still say race doesn't matter. That's literally what they said on this national call, was one that was so offensive to me, that you literally are saying my race and my experience don't matter, and that income means the same across racial groups, was saying that, wow, it doesn't matter what you think as a Black or brown person, that income confers the same benefit, when we literally know it doesn't. And I leaned in on, I was so disappointed. I was so everything. And of course they wrote, an op-ed about their feelings about it, but it really was like this, and this, because it is emotional, like it really was emotional for somebody to say it's all about income. And so I agree with you, Stephanie. I'm still upset about it, I like to say.
Thank you again for all these great responses. I'm so sorry we don't have time to get to all these questions. I am screenshotting them now so we can hopefully maybe get some responses to them later, maybe via email if there's anything left unsaid. I'm gonna go ahead and let you all go so that you have maybe a couple minutes before we get to our next session, and I'm gonna send the link out to our next session, which is a educator panel, not policy. Policy's later today.
You guys got so much. Thank you guys, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Janelle. And our captioner and our ASL interpreter. Thank you. I know that was hard work.
Thank you all so much. We'll see you at 1:15.
Bye.